Tonight, a former insider is raising questions about the hiring practices inside Tennessee's top law enforcement agency.
She says if you want to become a TBI special agent, one of the key questions may be, who's your daddy? News Channel 5's chief investigative reporter Phil Williams spent 3 months digging through TBI personnel files looking for evidence.
We're conducting search warrants. We're trying to glean information.
When it comes to the big cases like the abduction and murder of Holly Bobo,
one of the officers fired his weapon,
or shootings involving local police,
the street where you get run over,
or cases involving public corruption, responsibility often falls to special agents of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, agents for whom the badge is a badge of honor.
Nepotism is in the policy, and it's not allowed.
Melissa Smith worked in the TBI Human Resources Department for 2 years, where she says she watched the children of TBI bigwigs get hired as special agents over military veterans with far greater law enforcement experience. That despite a state law that says veterans will be given preference in hiring.
When we were trying to write the veterans letters to justify, why veterans weren't hired over everyone else that was hired, the word legacy came up.
Meaning?
That they're family members. It's part of their legacy to be a TBI agent.
Which sounds like a fancy word
for nepotism.
I'm absolutely looking for the best in life.
Last year, more than 1,000 people applied for just 14 TBI special agent jobs. One of the 14 lucky hires, Hunter Locke, did not even graduate until December from Cumberland University. His resume shows a degree in health and human performance with a minor in sports management. His primary work experience, he was a pizza delivery person. Still, a TBI interview panel voted to strongly recommend him to become a special agent.
There's a lot of competition out there, so you have to do things to set yourself apart.
Hunter's dad, it turns out, is TBI Deputy Director Jason Locke, the #2 man at the Bureau. Here, speaking to a group at Boise State, Locke had some advice on how other young men might fulfill their dreams of becoming TBI agents.
We always encourage people, especially if they're right out of college, maybe to try to get out and get some experience at a local law enforcement arena, at a local police department or sheriff's department.
But when it came to Locke's own son,
he wasn't a criminal justice major.
Nope.
He had never worked in law enforcement a day in his life.
Mm-mm.
If this had been any other young man straight out of college,
he wouldn't even made it through.
Notes from the TBI interviewers reflect his limited law enforcement experience. But then there's that word, legacy. We showed the notes to Melissa Smith.
What jumps out at you there?
The fact that they actually wrote the word legacy.
What does that tell you?
It's nepotism.
Mark Gwynn is the director of the TBI.
Are there situations where you might reject someone who's more qualified to give the job to someone's son or daughter?
What you may think is qualified may be totally different than what I think is qualified.
Experience.
What you may think is experience may be totally different than what I feel experience is.
Gwynn says he got his first police job because the police chief knew his dad, who was a reserve officer. And he says he hired his deputy director's son because he knows the values the young man learned inside their home.
He watched his father go out and work cases. He understood what the values at TBI were. And what that badge meant, that TBI badge meant.
If he had not been the deputy director's son, would he have been hired?
I can't answer that.
And legacy could be one of many criteria in the selection process.
Lou Ryder is a law enforcement consultant who retired as a deputy chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. He says it's good to have people who understand the values of an organization, but it shouldn't be the only factor.
If they're selected over more qualified persons, then you'd have to say, well, the legacy has more weight than it probably should be.
In fact, a year earlier, Luke Webb, the stepson of TBI Assistant Director T.J. Jordan, beat out more than 1,100 other applicants to become a special agent, even though the interview notes show he failed to get a strongly recommend from interviewers.
There aren't many in the interview process that get a recommend that make it through to the second round, because there are so many applicants and there are so few spots.
The #1 rule at the TBI is don't do anything to embarrass the TBI.
and one about the state's nepotism law. It says no state employees who are related shall be placed within the same direct line of supervision. In the case of Hunter Locke, he reports to a special agent in charge who reports to an assistant director who reports to Jason Locke. And Hunter's dad has the authority to act as the TBI's top dog when the director is away.
How does that not create a potential conflict of interest?
Because you've got to know TBI.
Gwen says TBI attorneys tell him that because Jason Locke does not directly supervise his son, it's not illegal. Still, Ryder says there's a potential conflict of interest.
Now, if Daddy, being top dog in the organization, then protects him and gives him favoritism on assignments and circumvents the normal processes, yeah, then that would be a potential liability.
If someone calls you tomorrow and says Hunter Locke or anyone else is getting preferential treatment, I'm willing to do something about that. But to turn my back on that young man that wants to live that dream of following in his father's footsteps, or anyone else out here that wants to follow in their parents' footsteps, I'm not going to do that.
Still, it turns out the TBI made some pretty questionable claims when it was required to produce these letters explaining why it did not hire veterans who had served their country. More on that when my investigation continues.
Thanks, Phil. And you can go right now to newschannel5.com to see extended interviews with everyone featured in tonight's story. Then be sure to watch tomorrow night at 6 when Phil reveals how the TBI justified the decision not to hire veterans.